week after the attack. So what was that like, steaming into the harbor, Pearl Harbor, with all those battleships destroyed?
We didn't believe it. We had a little newspaper, 8.5 by 11 sheet, and a couple sheets every day that they printed out and passed out. And we thought it was all lies. Couldn't sink a battleship, according to smart sailors, but they did. And so we got our eyes open when we come in there. Ships upside down, or sitting on the bottom of the stack sticking up. The harbor just deep in oil. I don't know how thick the oil was in that harbor, You never want to fall in it, I'll tell you that. But it was pretty sad, and we got quite a few of the sailors, the surviving sailors. They divided them up amongst the different ships that were there. And we got quite a few of them. We got quite a few off the Oklahoma, I remember. And I remember that. Some of those guys were kind of punchy because they'd been below decks, and that's where it gets tough. Some of them even crawl through ventilating pipes
to get out.
Yeah, so it was unbelievable.
Now, did you have to stay on board the Saratoga, or did you get to go on land there?
No, I never got ashore.
They probably kept you ready to go in case something else happened, because they were expecting there could be another attack at any minute. Yeah.
Right, and they didn't know what. The first thing we did was we took off for Wake Island because they thought maybe they could save those people that were down there. I think they were Marines, and I think there was Navy personnel there, but mainly Marines. And I do remember we got, I don't know, fairly close, and they never let the pilots go in, which, the pilots didn't like. They were...
Yeah, I saw that where that was a losing battle for us there. The Japanese took Wake Island.
I can remember hearing that because those pilots. I didn't think I'd do that, Dwayne, but anyway, those pilots, they were so mad. It was a smart thing to do, not go in, but they were, some of them were almost going to go with orders not to save what they could save, because they were so, a lot of those pilots, they were 22-year-old guys, they were eager, and they wanted to save anybody they could save, and they were hopped up at the Japanese. They were fired up, and I can remember that when we turned back. He gave it up, and it was just no doubt the smart thing to do. It was too late. But anyhow, and I remember submarines in the area and all that, But see, that's one thing about being topside. You weren't as worried about the torpedoes,
Yeah, I read in the history books where in the Solomon Islands, you really got torpedoed twice. The first time you got torpedoed, it killed 6 sailors and flooded 3 of the boiler rooms.
Yeah.
But you were able to make it back to Hawaii for repairs. And then the second time, it blew out the main electrical panels, and so then the Saratoga was dead in the water.
Yeah, I remember being dead in the water. We put under tow, Somebody got us under
Yeah, the
control.
cruiser, the Minneapolis, told you so you could launch your planes. So you launched the planes even being incapacitated. The ship was out,
Yeah.
and then of course they want you moving when they come back to land because it just makes it easier for them to land when you're facing the wind and
Oh,
moving
yeah.
into the wind. They can
Yeah,
touch
it-
down at 70.
Too fast.
Yeah, yep. So
Yeah, they gotta have that wind. Though they like to be doing about 25 knots with the ship, and hope you got a 15, 20 mile an hour wind besides.
that's a big help for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you remember any of the aircraft hitting the carrier and going off into the water, or
Oh yeah, yeah.
how did you? What would you do then? How would they get them out of the water? Was there
Destroyer.
destroyer? Yeah.
Yeah.
Normally, aircraft carriers very rarely are by themselves. They're always escorted
yeah.
by destroyers.
Destroyers, cruisers, and battle wagon.
I see.
You usually have a battle wagon, a couple of cruisers, and maybe 4 or 5 destroyers. They call it a task force. And sometimes you have 2 carriers. You'd have like Saratoga class, and then you'd have a Bataan class. Like that. It's a good idea. Like if a ship goes down or loses power, you got another one you can get your planes onto, maybe. But when a lot of times, you know, it seemed like I'm not sure if we had the catapult all the time or not, Dwayne, but I remember those pilots a lot of times. They'd go off of that flight deck, and then they'd go, flight deck's 45 feet to water, on there, and they'd go out of sight, Pretty quick, you see him coming up, way out there. You'd think he went down, But once in a while they'd go in to drink, And I saw one of the old first, the second torpedo plane was a TBM, and it was pretty big, carried torpedoes. But the first one, so I first one on was TBD, I think, seemed like. But I saw one of them hit on his belly right against the fantail, that right against the stern, right at the end of the flight deck. He hit on his belly, and the pilot and the crewman slid aboard, and the rest of the thing went in a drink.
So just the pilot and the co-pilot were sitting there on the deck of the aircraft carrier?
Who was a gunner, it busted that thing right in two, and they slid aboard.
Wow,
And the rest of it went in a drink.
Could they get up and walk? Or were they pretty badly busted up? Or
I don't know. I don't think they were. I think they got out of it. I don't think they were.
That's amazing.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember that. But actually, and you've seen it, some of those guys are crazy, those pilots. I've seen some of them. I know they were nuts,
Well, let's move the topic to the Bataan. So we've got the pictures going. Shows both the aircraft carrier, the Bataan, the Saratoga, and the 40 millimeter. So on the Bataan, you actually were more instrumental in the 40 millimeter, and of course the 40 millimeter was a anti-aircraft gun. And I looked it up, and it shot about 24,000 feet. So it could shoot pretty high into the sky. Normally about 12,000 feet was your normal range, though. And the Bataan, a smaller aircraft carrier, but served in several major battles to include New Guinea in April of 44, Saipan, the Marianas, the Battle of the Philippine Sea, June 44 through August. You were very instrumental in that battle. And then Okinawa in March of 45, which the Japanese defended fiercely because Okinawa was really kind of part of Japan.
Yeah. That's where we got into kamikaze. Yeah.
So what was it like on the 40 millimeter, firing the 40 millimeter?
Well, that was a lot better there because instead of an officer pulling the trigger, why they had enlisted men pulling the trigger and guiding the the site where an officer, you know, because of the tracers in the shells, the officer was adjusting. We had a Sperry gyroscope sight in there, and he's watching the tracers and the target, and he would adjust the reticule in the sight, you know, in that Sperry gyroscope sight. He would adjust that according to what his view of that was, you know, of the target, where the tracers were going. But the enlisted man there was the guy turning it and pulling the trigger. The trigger was on the handlebar. and so, but on the Saratoga, officers were doing them both, and the fire controlmen were just, at battle stations, were just kind of spare gear in case something broke down. You know, but on the baton, while we were actually pulling the trigger, and so it was a lot more exciting for battle stations.
Now,
and target practice.
And target practice. Now, was the 40 millimeter hard to clean, or did you have to completely tear it apart to clean it, or?
I don't know. Gunner's mate did it.
Oh, the gunner's mate did it. So you were actually.
The hydraulic electrical is what we worked on.
I see.
You know, because we'd send an electrical signal from that director, you know, which was mounted about, the whole thing was maybe 6 feet high and mounted maybe 2.5 foot base, and that sent an electrical signal to the mount, which had a hydraulic pump on it. That's how you control the elevation and the horizontal, was with all that electrical signal. And then you were pulling the trigger, that was all electrical, you know.
And I guess it shot about 120 rounds a minute. So
yeah, there was 4 in a clip, and they used clips. You know, there's 4 shells in a clip. And the gunner's mate and his crew, they dropped them right in there. They had to be pretty busy too. You know, it was a kind of a chain gang deal, passing them up there. You know, we had a big locker there with all kinds of those clips. I don't know how many.
Now, was yours a 1 barrel, 2 barrel, or 4 barrel?
Well, we had two twins, but all the rest were quads. You know, it just had the 2 twins.
Well, I bet it was hard to keep up with 4 barrels for those gunner's mates, keeping the ammo going.
That's why you had to have so many men aboard ship, you know. And that was the officer's job then, to try to figure out work for you to do when you weren't fighting, because you're not fighting very often. And that gets boring.
Yeah, that's, you know, I retired out of the military, and we would say days and days of boredom interrupted by seconds of terror.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah. Well, that's one thing about being on a carrier, and especially if you're up on the flight deck, because they're always, day and night, launching and retrieving planes. And there's something happening when that's going on, always. You know, somebody's can't get his wheels down, or his flaps down, or something's going on, you know. Oh. And it was more so then. They were all prop planes then, you know, more dangerous too. You know.
Now, what about fire training? I know the biggest fear on an aircraft carrier was fire, because you had so much ammunition, so much fuel for those planes. There's just so much fuel those planes go through that you guys probably had as much fuel on board as a tanker would. So, did you get a lot of training in fire?
We didn't get a lot, but then there's whole crews of that, you know. Fire guys that, you know, they get the training, and then the guys that are, we call them snipes, below deck, you know, they had so much training in that, and then there's all kinds of auxiliary equipment, you know, auxiliary powers, you know, startup auxiliary engines, and they got all kinds of Well, they don't miss much.
Now that catapult, was it steam like today? They're steam powered catapults. I don't know how they generate all the steam, but were they steam then, do you think?
Yeah, I'm sure it was. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not sure about catapult. You know, when that came on. Or, see, when I first went on to Saratoga, they had 8-inch on there. You believe that? And they fired them that time we went. See, I went on in September 41, and when we went to Pearl Harbor before the war, they fired those things. You know,
8-inch guns, huh?
They never fired him across the flight deck. That was one thing that they fired him off on the port side. But see, that was a different thinking. Was that they would need them, but it turned out they didn't need them because you got the battle wagons and the cruisers, so they took them off. You know, at one of our times in Bremerton, we had 5-inch on there. Or did we? Oh, I don't know, but they put 5-inch on it, 5-inch anti-aircraft. Those were a great gun. You know, they were good. They got to 8 miles. And
Yeah.
they were hooked up with radar.
And then I saw later in the war, we invented the proximity fuse so that if the round even got close to
Yeah,
an aircraft, it would go off. And
Heat.
of course,
yeah.
well, it sensed there was some heat. It could
Yeah.
sense some heat and stuff.
But we had a down on third deck. We had a computer room. You know, I can remember the first computer down there. Now I didn't, because I was on 40 millimeters. I didn't know much about them, but I did stand watch on them. You know, more than once. Just spare gear kind of guy, I think. But anyway, they were probably 2.5 feet wide, square, and the signal, either from optics or radar, came down electrically, you know, from up in the tops, and the ship speed came down, and the wind speed came down, and then you cranked in, you got by phone the estimated target speed, I think. You cranked in some things, the target, you know, the speed of the target. Or the roll of the ship came down. You know, all that came into that. We thought it was pretty compact, you know, it was 2.5, 3 feet wide, you know, and about 30 inches high, you know, and that was the computer, and that solved the target problem. That was what that did, you know, all those things that are involved with the target, you know, and the movement of the ship, and the wind, the speed of the ship, and all that, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot to.
And that went to the 5-inch, but not to the 40s.
Oh,
They didn't get any of that.
oh,
No. This Sperry gyroscope deal. First we had a 1.1 before that from Bremerton. When I first went aboard, they had 3-inch anti-aircraft. They took all those off before the war even, and put this 1.1 on. That was a piece of junk that had come from the Limeys, England, you know. As compared to the 40 millimeter, it was not very good. 40 millimeter was good, a lot better. But the 5-inch, they changed those too, and I don't know which one they ended up with, Dwayne. There was a 5-inch 51, a 5-inch 38. I think 5-inch 38 was the final one, and that was a great gun. Yeah. You imagine a 5-inch shell. Well, you know what a 5-inch shell is like. And that, you know, and get it on radar, tracking the target on radar, or if it's close enough in with optics, it's pretty accurate. Because, you know, as you say, explode in proximity, you know.
So after the Battle of Okinawa, it wasn't shortly after that we dropped, of course, those 2 atomic bombs in August, and that ended the war. So.
And that ended the war. And they took some gunner's mates and fire controlmen from a number of different ships and took us into Japan at the naval base there, Yokosuka, or Yokosuka, or something, however you pronounce it, naval base, and we were supposed to be experts. We didn't know nothing. Our bunch didn't. They had a couple of guys out of, we have a Marine detachment aboard ship, and they took a couple of fire controlmen and some gunner's mates. I don't remember how many took. They transferred us, by a boatswain's chair from the ship to a destroyer escort. Well, in our view, that's about like going from John Wayne's yacht to a 12-foot fishing boat. Of course, coming off a carrier. And that's what we rode around in for 4 or 5 days. The water was so rough they couldn't even set up tables. We ate off the deck. You sat on the deck, because if you set up table, they were sliding around, So anyway, we went ashore, and that's what we were supposed to be doing. But what we did was the Japs had 16-inch for battleship, 16-inch guns. They had powder in these caves on that island. I guess it may have been mainland, probably mainland. But anyhow, that's what we did. We hauled that. It was in big brass containers and in flannel sacks, sticks, and in flannel sacks, 16 inches wide in diameter, and we hauled that stuff out of those caves, and they ended up putting it on barge. No, I don't. I won't tell the dumb story that some chief had us doing, or some warrant officer, I don't remember what. But anyway, they hauled that brass out to sea and dumped it. And I'm sure the Japs retrieved that. That was solid brass. Those things probably weighed 200 pounds apiece, solid brass, with a big lid that screwed down, kept it dry. And then first we tried to burn that powder. That was the screw up.
Well, that's what we do in artillery too, is that when you get done firing all the powder you didn't need, we put it in a big pile and then we just burn it. And it burns fast.
Yeah, but our trouble, the first time they burned it, they didn't take it out of the sacks. Well, that acted like a propellant. It just set it on the ground and tried to burn it. I remember it was raining. We took off running because that held it, and that stuff went boom sky high. And I remember our backs were covered with mud. We ran so fast. Then they threw it in the coal tender box of an engine, a railroad locomotive engine, and threw it in there and burned it in there, But anyway, that's about the only thing we did, except wander around and try to steal stuff that the Japs left. They'd evacuated it, and I could see them. The civilians were going out of town. They thought we were going to come in and kill them all, I guess, and they were leaving town with their belongings on their back, going to the hill. But that was then we come back aboard ship, and then we come back to Pearl Harbor. We went through Panama Canal and up to New York City for Navy Day in October.
So did you get to march in New York City as part of Navy Day, or you stayed on, had to stay on ship, or?
No, I got one Liberty in New York City. I saw the, I forget that sunken skating rink in New York City, and the next day I was on a train for a Great Lakes training station the next morning for discharge. I was there one night.
Oh, wow.
That was it.
Wow. Now,
But
See-
everybody wasn't getting discharged. The ship still had a crew. Just the ones that were getting discharged.
so by then you'd already served 4 or 5 years, hadn't you? Or?
Yeah, it was, well, I went in June of 41, about 6 months before the war. And this was October, I think it was 22nd or something like that, of 45. So it was 4 years and 3 or 4 months, 4 years and 4 months, yeah, it's the 10th month, isn't it? Yeah. So I was eager to get out. I liked
bet.
my job. I liked fire control. It was the best job. I enjoyed it. You work 36 hours if things were broken down. You work straight through. But if you didn't, you goofed off. Just done checks on things. Well, you know how that is. His officers make you do something.
Yeah, I forget in the Army how the saying went, or something was, if it moved, you could shoot it and eat it, and if it didn't move, then you had to paint it.
Yeah. Well, we've scraped off more paint than we just painted last week, I'll tell you. But you got to keep guys busy, That's true. Especially young men.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that concludes our interview